Path of Exile just 2 days ago released the list of the 280 new notables that we'll gain access to via the new cluster jewels. If you're like me and you're like, oh shit, 280, I don't even know where to start, I spent 8 hours on stream going over every single one of those notables and putting them into a tiered list so you know what the highest value ones are and like what build is going to benefit most from those. Hi guys, Catmaster here with another video. I quickly want to go over this list of cluster jewels that I tiered into a 6 into a 7 tier list, starting with S, which is the best tier, and then going from A, B, C, D, E to F for the worst tier. In this video, I'll quickly let you know what were the criteria for each of the tiers, as well as give you the thought process behind the top tier notables and the worst tier notables. Everything else is disputable. Keep in mind that I had around 2 minutes per notable when I initially made the tier list. It's 280 notables. 2 times 280 is 560 minutes. That means I spent 8 hours making this list, and I still didn't have a lot of time to think about every single one. I did get a little bit of feedback on Reddit and from the viewers and from my Twitter followers, so I worked that in and I shifted some tier rounds. But keep in mind, this is first of all subjective. I haven't played all builds in Path of Exile, so this is according to my understanding of the average build. And secondly, it's also you know, notables may just be plus minus 1 tier. I'm not the absolute institution when it comes to rating things in Path of Exile. Arguably, most of these passives are within the plus minus 1 range of the right tier, but it's still a subjective list. Take it with a grain of salt. This is mainly for all the people who look at all the flood of new passes and they don't have any clue how to rate anything. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of a structure. What is really good, what benefits really greatly some builds, and what is, you know, more filler than killer. They're still gonna be good value. Even a tier that are rated in E or even in F can be decent on a jewel, at least decent enough to allocate it. But again, I'll explain in detail what each tier means to me and why each of the notables ended up in the best or the worst tier. Before we go into this video, I want to quickly thank all the new subscribers and welcome them to the channel, as well as thank my existing subscribers and followers on Twitch for the extensive support that I've received. It's been nothing but a blast doing content in these last couple of months. I apologize for the lack of YouTube content in the last 30 days, but going forward, there will be at least 2 videos on this channel per week, if not 4, and every once in a while there will be a high production quality one. If you want to support me in the quest of making these, there's Twitch Prime, by the way, and I do have a Patreon over on patreon.com where you can pledge to my channel and help me generate an income with which I will be able to make higher quality content by hiring editors that will then cut the videos for me as I prepare them, and that will allow me to just push out more content faster on a higher quality level. Thanks again, and welcome to the channel. So, my idea for tiering the cluster jewels was that tier S, A, and B are notables that you would target primarily when rolling your cluster jewels. S is the very desirable without or almost without exception. Notables belong into the S tier if they provide stats unavailable elsewhere, or stats that are very limited in availability on the passive tree or exclusive to certain ascendancy classes. They are either almost universally good with high value or without competition for certain build archetypes or skills. A is mostly desirable, but just slightly shy of the power level it would have needed to land an S. Notables belong into the A tier if they provide either stats unavailable elsewhere but objectively not as high value as S, or stats that would be available elsewhere as well, but very desirable. B is still desirable, but not on every build would you go for rolling a jewel with a notable from this tier in mind. Most of these are not exclusive to notables, but generally desirable stats, just not as high in priority or not as high in value in comparison to other sources of these stats. They could also be good value, but conditional or situational. C, D, and E are notables I would not target primarily while rolling jewels, but I would happily have them alongside my main priority notable rolls if they complement my builds. C is very desirable as a stat boost for a cluster jewel or a cluster jewel region as a whole. There's some really good stuff in C, but it's either very niche, very conditional, or very generic. D is mostly desirable, but just slightly shy of the power level of the notables in C. It's still decent, but either just a bit worse than C, or even more niche or conditional. E is still generally desirable, as, you know, these notables are pretty good value in general, but you're starting to ask yourself here whether you would be better off just picking nodes from the tree instead, because the power level is even lower than D, and or more niche in terms of stat composition, or they have one good line only. F is mostly not desirable. The stats are not synergistic enough or too situational or conditional, and in most cases I would probably not use the jewel or allocate it. So this is the PNG of the tier list that I made for you guys. I will link it in the comments down below. Keep in mind that this is a pixel graphic version and this is huge. This has a couple of megabytes because it's like a 2200 by 6000 pixels big. I will also include the scalable vector graphic version of this, which looks like this. It scales down a little bit more rough, but when you zoom in, you will have all the details of the screenshot pixel graphics of the notables. So if you're looking for something to print on a poster, or if you just want to look a little bit more closely, I would recommend the SVG. But obviously the PNG is also great to handle in a browser. But it is a little bit small. That said, we'll go over the tiers real quick. Not over the tiers, but only over the top tier notables and the bottom tier notables. So, on the top tier, first skill we have is Seal Mender. Skills supported by Unleash have 30% increased seal gain frequency. Unleash is a support gem that lets you stack up seals that regenerate over so many seconds, and then whenever you use the skill, you unleash the additional seals. Normally, by default, Unleash can have up to 3 seals, so you have the initial cast and 3 repeats for a total of 4, but there's also a anointable only passive on the tree that gives you +1 seals on Unleash for a total of 5 casts, and increased seal gain frequency is insane for Unleash builds. Blade Vortex is probably the highest up there, but there's also other skills that benefit from Unleash quite largely, so this is one of the top tier ones. Rotten Claws is 20% chance to impale on hit with attacks for minions, which is incredibly good as minions previously were only able to get up to 60% chance to impale, 40 from the Impale support gem and 20 from a Dread banner that you'd have to run on your summoner as a mana reservation. So not only are you able to get up to 100% if you get 2 Rotten Claws, because these notables do stack with each other. You can get the same notable multiple times if you're rich or lucky. And that means you can not only get 100% chance to impale on hit with minions, but you can actually also give up that Dread banner and get something else for the 10% mana reservation. Chilling Presence means nearby enemies are chilled. This is incredibly good because chilling reduces enemy action speed. In this case only by 10%, so it's not huge, but it also gives the chilled status, so it enables stuff like hypothermia support that grants you more damage with hits against chilled enemies, but also the new ring that will be added in 3.10 that allows you to replace one of the two Skitterbots aura with a curse aura. Then you can use that to replace the chilling Skitterbots aura, and you can still chill nearby enemies with chilling presence. Really good value, and not available elsewhere. Cold Conduction is enemies chilled by your hits are shocked and enemies shocked by your hits are chilled, which looks pretty good. From how I understand it, that means that your shock effect also becomes your chill effect and your chill effect becomes your shock effect. So this could be very, very good, but we have to see how people incorporate it into their builds. Unspeakable Gifts is Profane Bloom Explosions. Unspeakable Gifts gives you a 10% chance to explode on enemies you kill, which will then deal a quarter of their max life as chaos damage in an AoE explosion. This scales with AoE damage, with chaos damage, and in general with the enemy's life, which makes this incredibly valuable during clear, just like the Obliteration explosions granted by the Obliteration Wand or Profane Bloom on the Occultist Ascendancy. Supercharge makes your lightning damage with non-critical strikes lucky. Lucky in Path of Exile means that you roll twice instead of once and the better result is picked. So this is incredibly valuable for Elemental Overload non-crit lightning damage builds, such as Stormbrand or Arc, which typically you wouldn't get around playing them as crit in endgame if you really wanted damage, but now with the new tools that we got, namely the Supercharge notable and the ability to scale additional flat lightning damage off of our mana, Mind over Matter non-crit lightning damage builds will be pretty strong, I anticipate, but we'll have to see how it pans out. Nevertheless, Supercharge, super valuable passive. Deep Cuts give you 15% chance to impale enemies on hit with attacks, and impales you inflict last 1 additional hit. Impale, per default, lasts only 5 hits, so if you paid attention in math class, 1 additional hit means 20% more damage with Impale on the first one that you get. But since we know we can stack those, you can actually get another 1 additional hit and another one, which there is diminishing returns. The more you stack, the less the relative gain is, but they're still incredibly good. Impale is a very, very strong archetype, and it hasn't really been nerfed. This makes it really, really strong. Overwhelming Malice gives you a 10% chance to gain Unholy Mite for 4 seconds on critical strike. Unholy Mite is a buff in Path of Exile that grants you 30% of your physical damage as extra chaos damage, which is insanely valuable if you're not playing brutality builds that exclude elemental and chaos damage from being dealt in favor of more physical. Anything that is pure phys that doesn't run brutality or physical to elemental conversion will be very, very happy to get this if they crit on average once per 4 seconds, which on a fast hitting build doesn't seem to be that hard. And again, keep in mind, we can stack these for 20, 30, 40% chance to get Unholy Mite for 4 seconds on crit. Incredibly powerful. Next up on the list is Fan of Blades. Fan of Blades makes attack skills fire an additional projectiles while... Fan of Blades makes attack skills fire an additional projectile while wielding a claw or a dagger. While this is very specific to claws and daggers, and most attack skills don't benefit on single target from an additional projectile, there is one skill, namely Molten Strike, that will want this very, very badly and will benefit highly from this. And on all other attack skills, this is still very, very good for clear. Definitely keep this in mind if you're planning to run a Frostblades build or a Spectral Throw build as well, not only Molten Strike. Next up on the list, Hex Breaker. Hex Breaker grants you attack and cast speed while channeling and makes you immune to curses while channeling. Now, Cyclone is a channeling skill since Legion 3.8. 3.7. So basically, if you're playing a Cyclone build, you put on Hex Breaker, you don't need a Curse Immune Flask. And every other channeling build will also likely be able to ditch the channeling flask if they're able to get immunity to silence on a jewel. If you get cursed with silence while you're not channeling, then you wouldn't be able to start channeling in order to get the curse immunity. So you really need to be silence immune for this to work on any build but Cyclone. But on a Cyclone build, you're basically holding down Cyclone from start to end in a map. So this is more than enough to make you drop that Curse Flask and get another unique flask or something else in your build. Purposeful Harbinger gives you 10% increased effect of auras on you for each herald affecting you. This is incredibly valuable in a duo setup where you run on one character with a support that runs auras, because that one carry, the damage dealer, can then stack 4 or even all 5 heralds for a total of 50% increased effect of auras on you, and the support player would then stack all the offensive auras and massively boost the power of the damage dealing character. Very, very strong for party setups. Intensity gives you 10% increased area damage, and skills supported by Intensify have +1 to maximum intensity. Intensity is a support gem that reduces the area of effect with stacks of intensity and grants more damage per stack of intensity. Naturally, intensity can only get up to 4 stacks, and with one additional stage of intensity, you will get another 16% more damage on top of the more damage multiplier, which are probably on the whole on your build, it's probably only going to be like 10% or even only 8% more damage. It's still incredibly strong. And again, keep in mind you can stack those. Haunting Shout reduces the Warcry cooldown recovery speed and grants you Intimidate and Unnerve for enemies taunted by your Warcry. Intimidate, you should know from the Tombfist gloves or from Belt of the Deceiver, it makes enemies take 10% increased attack damage. Unnerve is the spell version of Intimidate that was previously very, very hard to get and only available, I think, on Hunter gloves and some other interactions, but now with Warcries very, very easily available. On my Herald of Purity Endurance Charge Juggernaut, this would have been incredible because the Holy Relics deal spell damage and the Herald of Purity Sentinels deal attack damage, and I was using Enduring Cry all the time in order to gain endurance charges or to keep them up in boss situations anyway, so this would have been really, really good. Definitely value, but most minion builds are going to use the other one that we're going to get to in a second. Wrapped in Flame is an exception. I would normally not have put this into the S tier. It's more like an A tier because it doesn't really provide you anything that you couldn't get elsewhere, but the stat composition is very, very juicy for Righteous Fire, and any Righteous Fire build is pretty much going to want this because all 3 stats are hot for Righteous Fire, no pun intended. Master of Fear, basically the same as Haunting Shout, but on curse. Enemies you curse are intimidated, enemies you curse are nerfed. I already explained those. Really, really powerful. Very, very powerful for minions in general, because, you know, summoners usually often run mixed setups of spell damage dealers and attack damage dealers. Really incredible value. Self-Fulfilling Prophecy gives you +1 base crit on Herald skills and 25% critical strike multiplier if you dealt a critical strike with a Herald skill recently. This is really, really strong for auto bombers or basically anything that can reliably freeze and benefit off of Herald crit explosions. So if you're playing Stormbrand Assassin, even though Heralds are not going to be your main damage output, this is still going to be very, very juicy for clear. Incredible value. Make sure to look out for this. Pure Agony gives you +1 maximum number of Sentinels of Purity, +5 maximum Virulence, which is for the Herald of Agony, and it lets your minions deal 20% increased damage while you're affected by a Herald. So basically, if you're either playing Herald of Purity or Herald of Agony, this is incredibly good, because it probably even is better for Herald of Purity than for Herald of Agony, because +5 max Virulence does help the damage. It was previously unavailable elsewhere, but +1 max number of Sentinels of Purity is basically 20% more damage if you already had the helmet enchant for +1 max number of Sentinels of Purity, because then you had a maximum of 5. Default on the gem is 4, so if you only have the default and you get this on top, it's 25% more damage by getting an additional Sentinel. Really strong. Blessed Rebirth. Minions created recently cannot be damaged. I don't think I have to say anything about this. You spawn SRS, you spawn animated weapons, any temporary minions cannot be damaged, or any minions cannot be damaged if you created them recently, but temporary minions like animate weapons, skeletons, or SRS, you constantly create. So basically they're only up for like 4 seconds and they're immune. Incredible value. Fettle, 10% max life and 20 flat. This is comparable to Constitution almost. This is like Constitution Light. Incredible value. Hard to get elsewhere for that amount. Definitely strong. Sublime Sensation, 10% max ES, 8% max life. This is around 4 notables from the normal tree worth, because it's 2 times 4 max life, 2 times 5 energy shield. That's worth as much as 4 notables. Really, really good. Same goes for Holistic Health for Mind Over Matter builds, because this gives you 8% increased max life and 10% increased maximum mana. Will Shaper is 5% max mana as extra maximum energy shield. This is a stat that was previously only available on Ascendancies, I think. Now available on a notable. Very juicy. Spring Back, 6% increased max energy shield, 10% faster start of ES recharge, 15% increased energy shield recharge rate. Very, very good stat composition. Not really that high in value in terms of raw energy shield, but faster start of recharge and recharge rate are very, very good defensive mechanisms for energy shield builds, unless of course they depend solely on leech. Now, Prismatic Carapace and Prismatic Dance give you increased armor and evasion respectively, and a 1% to all maximum elemental resistances. Again, I don't think I have to explain these. Even if you don't have any +1 all max resist, this is at the very least 4% less elemental damage taken, but the higher your elemental resist already is, the more value it is, so incredible. Blessed gives you increased max life, mana, and chaos resist. Similar to Holistic Health, just very, very good valuable, probably like 4 or 5 passive points in the tree. Conservation of Energy is 8% increased maximum energy shield, 0.3% of spell damage leech as energy shield, and 20% increased maximum total recovery per second from energy shield leech. Now, just like life leech, energy shield leech, per default caps out at 20% of your maximum energy shield or life per second. So getting another 20% increased maximal total recovery per second would then mean you get 24% of your life per second as your maximum leech rate rather than 20%. Again, this is a stat that is not really available in abundance, very limited in availability, hence absolute S tier, because it really makes all the difference in the world if you leech back your energy shield faster. Now, energy from Nod is something that I previously had in tier A and that I tiered up just because it is so good and technically unavailable elsewhere, because flat energy shield is not really a thing in the tree. There's some in the Witch Start. The Occultist used to have 150 flat maximum energy shield, but they removed that when they nerfed Occultist 3 leagues ago, so yeah, this is really good. And again, if you think about, you're able to stack this, and you know, energy shield helmets or shields are already good early on in the league. If they have 300, 400 ES, that's really, really value already. And then this is like basically a third or a fourth of a good helmet just on a notable. Really, really good. Expendability is something I previously misjudged and put lower because I thought that the throwing mines takes 10% more time for each additional mine thrown was too harsh of a downside, especially because it's unexpected with a 10% chance to proc. But I talked to some people who play traps and mines. This is basically just more damage, and throwing mines takes 10% more time for each additional mine thrown. Sounds like a downside, but that's how it always works, and that's how it also works with Minefield or with other support gems or mechanics that add an additional throw to your throw. So absolute S tier. If you're miner or trapper, you're definitely chasing this. So we're not going to go over any other tiers other than the best and the worst. The stuff in the middle is pretty much self-explanatory. But if you have any questions about how I tiered these, make sure you ask them in the comments down below. Now, people probably want to know why these are as bad as I said they were. Now, Ancestral Mite gives you totem damage, totem duration, and increased totem damage if you haven't summoned a totem in the past 2 seconds. This looks very good at start, but totem duration really doesn't matter because as a totem build you can just resummon your totems, and you generally speaking do that all the time because there is some effects on Hierophant and some effects in the tree that proc whenever you place a totem. Namely, the crit cluster in the tree has 100% increased global critical strike chance if you placed a totem recently. Now recently is 4 seconds, so if you're placing a totem then you're not benefiting from this line for 2 seconds. So there's only really a window of 2 seconds where you benefit from both this and the 100% crit from the tree. Yeah. It's not the worst, it's certainly not good, because 2 seconds in combat are a long time. Brutal Infamy is increased damage with hits and ailments against unique enemies. We decided this is way too situational for unique enemies, and it's only 40% increased damage. Yes, 40% increased damage is basically a helm enchant. The average helm enchant does have 40% increased damage, but a lot of times you're not fighting unique enemies and you're not benefiting from this. You probably want any other notable that would benefit your build over this. That's why this is tier F. Fearsome Warrior is increased area of effect and a 25% chance to intimidate nearby enemies for 4 seconds on melee kill. Now if this was on melee hit, this would be 1 tier higher, but since it is on melee kill, it is something that you cannot have on bosses, for example. On enemies where the Intimidate really matters, you're not going to benefit from this. So, yeah. Yeah, no. There's other good ways to get Intimidate, and the overall value is just not good enough on this. Again, if you get it, why not? But you probably have a better source of Intimidate in your build if you're benefiting from Intimidate, and 8% AoE are probably not worth the notable alone. Mage Vayne gives you 5% chance to spell block while dual wielding, 20% chance to gain a power charge when you block, and attack skills deal 20% increased damage while dual wielding. So first of all, this is awkwardly specific to dual wielding. It's only block spell damage, and power charges are the easiest charges to generate in the game. You can get power charges with a power charge on crit setup on a utility skill like Stormbrand or Orb of Storms. And yeah, overall, just not that great. Practiced Caster is 20% increased spell damage, 5% increased cast speed, and 35% chance to avoid interruptions from stuns while casting. I don't think the overall value of this is super good. I may have misjudged it because you could technically stack them and get complete stun immunity while casting, but then you'd still not be stun immune, you just avoid interruptions from stuns while you're casting. So if you're walking around, if you're trying to reposition, you could still get stunned and die to that. And, you know, 20% increased damage, 5% cast speed is available elsewhere. There's nothing special about it. It's not high value. It's super situational. Probably not a recommendation. Burden Projection gives you increased spell damage and knock enemies back on hit with spell damage. Now, I had a discussion on Reddit about this with someone who is a really big fan of the knockback mechanic, but in the end, it's just not reliable enough to have 8% chance. You probably want to combine it with other sources. 30% increased spell damage is very generic, and it's only 30% and nothing else other than a knockback. If you're really going for a knockback build, you probably want to go for Thunderstruck, which gives you lightning damage and makes your critical strikes knockback shocked enemies always. So if you're going with a lightning crit build, you basically knock back on every hit, because shocking is really easy after they changed the formula in the last patch. So definitely keep that in mind. You probably don't want Burden Projection. Now, Fan the Flames is another one where at first you think, hey, that's actually really cool. It is a proliferation with a 15 range. The problem is that if you care about your ignite damage, if you're an ignite build, then you are very likely already running the support gem Ignite Proliferation support. This support gem at level 20 grants you a 39% ignite damage multiplier, more multiplier, and it grants you a proliferation with a base radius of 20. Now, if you have Fan the Flames, you could replace Ignite Prolif maybe for a slightly better more multiplier, but you would be sacrificing a quarter of your radius, which is just not worth it. It really isn't. The only builds where I see use for Fan the Flames are builds that are not dealing damage with the ignites, but they want to ignite enemies to get a bonus against burning or ignited enemies, which could be really good, but if you want your ignites to deal damage, you probably want Ignite Prolif. Chip Away has 25% increased brand activation frequency if you haven't used a brand skill recently, and a 20% increased brand attachment range. This is not really that great, because if you're using brands similar to the Ancestral Mite, you're probably using brand skills at least once every 4 seconds. Most notably, you're using brand recall, which makes all your brands come to your position and activate once. And you use that at least once every 4 seconds, so you'd never benefit from the increased brand activation frequency, and the increased brand attachment range, while nice and clear, is not enough to justify getting this. Last but not least, we got Blacksmith. This is just fire damage leached as life. A little bit of armor, a little bit of fire resist. I don't think this is super valuable. This is, people said this is mini chieftain. I think Elemental Leech is... There's better ways to get Elemental Leech in your build, and everything else is just so generic. There's other nodes that grant armor or fire resist in a better way. Just my opinion, this could probably be... Out of all the ones that I got in the F tier, this could probably be the one that deserves it the least, because it's a really nice filler on a jewel that already has good stats. You probably gladly take that additionally. Again, it's just my personal opinion. Don't get super upset about it, but hey, feel free to share your opinion about my tier list in the comments down below. Tell me what you think needs to go up, what you think needs to go down, what you would have expected to be S instead. If you have any questions at all about this, make sure to leave a comment in the comment section down below. Check out the stream, come over to twitch.tv/CatmasterOP, ask me questions in chat, and most importantly, have a glorious league start, enjoy 3.10 Delirium, let me know about your experiences and what kind of videos you want to see in the future. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video.